Hello, people, and welcome back to another episode of the Tech of Tomorrow podcast, where we believe that the real technology of the future are the humans building the technology and building the future. Now, housekeeping note, remember to like the show, subscribe on YouTube because the channel is too small. Remember to follow on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple, and any other platform where you listen to podcasts and grace us with your attention. Now, with the housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about our guest today, who is somebody very special and very dear to me. It's also somebody not strictly in tech. Why? Because today we're going to talk about how you cannot, how tech doesn't matter if you don't fix some other things in your business. And our guest
Yeah.
today is somebody that I'm proud to consider a business partner. We actually work together at his company, Rev-X-Cel. He is the founder. I am currently serving as his head of sales, and together we train sales and marketing teams into performing better together. Now, that said, over with this shameless self promo, I would like to welcome my friend and yours, Garrath Robinson. Hello, Garrath. How are you doing?
Thank you, brother, man. I am really excited to be on here, and you're too kind. I think I'm the one that's really lucky here. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you over the last 8 or 9 months, and especially the last 3 or 4 months. I think you and I started realizing we see things through a very similar lens, but on different sides of the go-to-market, function. And we've kind of gravitated towards each other in the last few months, and really excited to partner with you, man. I think, you and I had a great conversation around two is one and one is none, and the idea that together, I think we bring something to the table that nobody else can. And I think partnering with you was just kind of like a no-brainer. I love what you're about. I love what you represent, and you have an incredible story that really resonates with me. And you're one of those people I would consider a foxhole kind of guy. When shit's hitting the fan, who do you want in the foxhole with you? Seb's one of those guys, man. So I'm really excited to be on here today with you, and really excited to get this partnership kicked off and do some big things together.
Yeah, I mean, I just realized us coming up with this business idea has been like gestating a baby. It's been 9 months, and we
Yeah.
finally came up with it. So it's been a long
I
time
remember
coming.
our first conversation was it's like we planted a seed like 8 or 9 months ago, and then that just kind of organically developed over time. So it's been really cool to kind of see that play out as well.
As I always say, right? You reap what you sow, never when you sow. So with that said, you know, the audience of this show is very business, even though sometimes we dive into other things. Today is one of those other
Yeah.
things, but it's still business. So, what do you think is the biggest mistake marketing teams are doing? Because your content,
Yeah.
man, is punchy. People follow Garrath on LinkedIn. His content is punchy and is real. So, what do you see that's wrong right now in the marketing space, especially in B2B?
Yeah, I think, probably the biggest issue right now is just kind of looking at the last 18 to 24 months. So much of the conversation has been driven around strategy development. Um, and, I think there's a lot of great, frameworks that are being pushed out of some of these think tanks. And I know that there's a big push to kind of modernize go to market, but I think that we're approaching it from the wrong angle. I think we're focusing way too much on, these strategic frameworks that don't really get down into the weeds of tactical execution. And how do you actually get a team to go implement that strategy working as one and avoiding the entire, kind of what I call the cycle of chaos that happens in go to market, where you've got a few weeks where everybody, year kicks off, you have a great sales kickoff meeting, everybody's on the same page, but then, you get 4, 5, 6 weeks into, Q1, and everything kind of just starts to break down. And then by that point, we're on this end of quarter rush, to fill pipeline and hit target. And then, what you see is that breakdown just starts carrying over into the next quarter and the next quarter. And, the typical way that we address that is really with a band-aid. And that's thinking that we need to tweak the strategy, that it's just the messaging, that maybe we don't have the right data model in the CRM. And I think all of those, when you look at them at the surface level, it all makes sense. But this leads to what I call kind of like, that data delusion, where we're so focused on thinking we need data to elevate our execution that we get stuck in these endless cycles where, you get everybody on board, we all go to Top Golf, and everybody sings Kumbaya, and we're back on the same page. And then what happens the next Monday? The same cycle just keeps repeating itself. And so, companies, they come in, they hire consultants, they go to all these think tanks and they go to these seminars and these webinars, and everybody tells them to address it through the strategic lens. But the reality is, when we break it all down, when you have conversations with people who are on the front lines trying to implement some of what they're learning out in the market, they're getting nowhere with it. And that's because there's this gap between the strategy that gets put on paper and how we execute that at the front lines on a day-to-day basis. And so where we come from with our strike framework is really trying to give companies that framework that they need, not only from an implementation model, but from the way that we think about go-to-market and how we think about executing as one team. We give them that framework to where, hey, let's get everybody integrated, focused on one goal with one mission, and how do we integrate these teams to where we're performing at a high level and we're not dealing with these, everything breaks down and then we get everybody back on track for a week and then it breaks down again. And so that's where we're really trying to focus right now, because you can have the best framework in the world, you can have the best strategy in the world, and in fact, I don't think strategy is the problem in most cases. It's how we execute on the strategy. It's how we get tactical in the weeds at the day-to-day frontline level.
Why does it happen so often that management comes up with a strategy, the strategy doesn't get followed, and then the cycle repeats year after year?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of that classic case, what I would even call like the performance paradox, right? Where, everybody's heads down. And again, it kind of extends off of this, the kind of thinking that gets pushed out of these think tanks, where it's like, if you're in a nice suit and tie in an air conditioned boardroom, everything sounds great on paper, but then when we actually have to go implement that and execute it, nobody's really given the context on what it's going to take to execute it. This is what you hear from so many CEOs and CROs, CMOs, is that like it almost feels like no matter what they do, there's this gap between what we want to do and how we actually execute on that. And I think that's the biggest piece that people struggle with. And then, our natural tendency is to, okay, maybe we need to go look at the data more. Maybe we need to add more signals. Maybe we're not tracking the right signals, or, maybe we need to pull some reports and try to make sense of all of this. And it's like, you do that so many times, you just keep it ending right back up in the same spot. So that's a sign that it's not a strategic problem and it's not a data problem. It's how we execute go to market. How do we keep everybody moving as one motion?
Why do you think think tanks think tanks have become such a prevalent phenomenon in business? Because I don't see any sense to it, right? I see these executives taking advice from people who are not only detached from their business, that's fine. You do need external perspective, but they are detached from
Yeah.
reality. And we see this happen at the highest level. So why have think tanks become so important at the highest level when they have no actual results to show for them?
Yeah, it's funny because I saw a think tank post the other day that we've calculated that our go-to-market model has helped create X billion dollars in enterprise value. And I'm like, how? Like, we're like, I need hardline verifiable proof of that, And, I'm looking at the post around this and I'm like, this is supposed to be an organization that has the top flight marketers and the top flight salespeople. But yet, let me take it back a little bit. I think that especially in SaaS, especially in tech, um, whether we realize it or not, there's this like subconscious race to be first. Like everybody wants to be at the leading edge of what's coming next. And I think that creates a broken incentive system where, people are just creating things to create them, to say, I have a better mousetrap, to say, I have a better framework, I have a better methodology. The reality is it doesn't matter if it's better because if you can't execute it on it at all, if you can't implement it, if you don't know how to maintain it and optimize it over time, well, it doesn't matter how much better it is because it's still as good as broken compared to what they were doing before. And I think a lot of that just goes missing in these boardrooms where, the incentive, you look on LinkedIn, the incentive is to be a yes man in the comments. The incentive in these network groups isn't to be, somebody who pushes back on, some of the narratives that are being, pushed out of these organizations. It's to kind of fall in line and believe wholeheartedly in, what these people are saying and doing. And you see, they build a whole certification model around it, this, that, and the other to kind of drive home that this is a real legit, model that you can go implement. But it's like, how many companies have the time, the bandwidth, the resources, and the money to go implement your 12-step, go-to-market framework? Very, very few. The reality is, and you know this as well, is a lot of these CMOs, a lot of these CEOs, they're looking for people like they're not looking for a 6-month fix. They're looking for people who can come in and get shit done right away. Like, hey, we have this specific problem. We need to solve it. And we're trusting that you can get this turned around in 2 to 4 weeks. And a lot of these people, I think, are detached from that level of execution. And part of this, I think, comes down to just the mindset, especially on the marketing side, where, in sales, you have more A type, A players, people who are probably a little bit more ADHD and, drinking a little more caffeine. Where in marketing, I call it the arts and crafts mindset, where so many marketers are just sitting around waiting to be told or asked what to do, like reactive to what sales is doing, reactive to what customer success is doing. And I think some of that mentality just bleeds out into other areas. And yeah, so I think that there's multiple different, incentive structures in place for why they've become so popular and why people tend to fall in line with what's getting pushed out of some of those, larger think tanks.
I've, what I'm seeing also, I agree completely, by the way. I've seen the marketing arts and crafts mindset, or at least I've seen a couple marketing teams fall there because they've been
Yeah,
partly it was their internal culture that led there, partly it is the culture of the company. It was a B2B tech company that pushed
yeah,
them to get relegated to that role and to that identity of arts and craft. And we don't really have an impact, and we wait for somebody to tell us what the impact is now. But where I'm getting to this is that I sense that CMOs and marketing teams in general have never been so vulnerable. We have a recession coming. The most of the value is being created in tech or tech adjacent industries. Now, the issue when we talk about marketing teams is that since they are seen as a support function, they become expendable. They are the first team that gets laid off, or at least has members laid off. I have a client, huge company with several thousands of employees. They do not have a CMO. They got rid of their
yeah,
marketing 5 years ago,
yeah,
and they have no intention of building it back because it was seen as a support function. Now, there is another stat that comes from Harvard Business Review. Don't quote me on this, but I think it was either 72 or 82% of CEOs do not trust their their CMO, which brings me to ask you, can your strike approach, can what you teach companies help marketers be in a stronger position? Can it help them have a stronger claim to, hey, we are not a support function, we are a vital part of this business, and this is why you want to keep us, and you actually might even want to expand us?
yeah. I want to hit on something really quick. We talk about the perception of marketing, and you talk to so many salespeople and so many sales leaders, and the general perception is that marketers are very reactive. In a lot of ways, I think you would find a lot of salespeople that would say marketers are lazy to some degree. Now, I don't think the lazy part is true. I just think that a lot of teams don't really know how to execute the initiatives that are being driven. Some of it might be hey, like I've just never been shown how to do this, and I'm in an environment where it's very much just figure it out on your own. Some of it might be due to, hey, it's just a broken process, but nobody's allowing me to fix it. because there's some level of control above me where I can't really own this process. I think also some of it comes down to, you know, do we have visibility across the org? When we talk about like data visibility, um, so often it kind of gets looped into the higher level strategic side of things. When I talk about data visibility, really what I'm speaking to is your ability to see real-time engagement, real-time buying signals, real-time interactions with your prospects and your buyers so you can get out in front of sales and give them what they need to execute. And so I think that perception comes down to mistraining, kind of trying to adopt some of these strategic frameworks that get pushed out of these think tanks, right? But not really having the resources, the knowledge, and the experience to effectively implement those on a day-to-day and execute on those on a day-to-day basis. So where our strike framework comes in is we try to fill that gap. What we're focused on is getting teams to kind of get away from the strategic planning and looking at all the data 5 times a week, et cetera, and get back to, hey, how can we execute razor sharp as a team? And so we focus on signal intelligence, right? We want to see like where are our best buying signals coming from? So as a prospect's moving throughout the pipeline or as a deal's moving through the pipeline, hey, I've got a deal over here that has been carried over 2 quarters in a row, but now we've got signal intent that they've been on the pricing page twice. They visited our Gartner page once. Hey, they're probably in that moment where they're ready to buy. And so really where our framework comes in is we give people that mental model and we give them that tactical model that they can implement on a day-to-day basis and keep their teams aligned and keep those teams moving forward around the right things, kind of shifting that mindset away from activity level metrics to impact level metrics. Okay, so thinking about MQLs is a great thing to track, when we want to see how is the budget turning into pipeline. But we need to get tactical in the weeds with what we're tracking and get into how many deals are we booking or how many meetings are we booking? How many SQLs are turning into meetings booked? How many meetings booked are turning into opportunities? And really understanding where those things break down in the pipeline. Because a lot of times, this gets looked at as a sales problem. But so often, more often than not, the real problem and the root cause of why those deals are slipping through is because marketing is sitting on their hands, waiting to be asked for the resource, waiting to be asked for the collateral, when really they need to be out in front tracking those things in lockstep with sales so we don't miss those opportunities. So I think, when we're talking about day-to-day execution, that's really what we're looking at. The MQLs and all that stuff, to me, those are good to track, but that's not what I'm looking at on a weekly basis to see, the level of performance that the marketing team is performing at.
So implementing this framework can help a CMO and their team feel more safe about their decision because they become essential, right, to the whole pipeline of the business.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we want. That's what we want. We want to feel, kind of going back to, the example you gave earlier, hey, they cut their entire marketing department because they looked at it as a support function. A lot of that is due to the perception that marketing is reactive. A lot of that is due to the perception that marketing doesn't really support sales. And this is where we need to shift, the narrative in marketing to we are the spearhead for sales. We need to be out in front of sales. We're not a support function. In fact, we're the spearhead here. And so I think that's a big piece of why CEOs especially might look at the marketing function and say, hey, we're going to reduce headcount here because we're not getting anything out of it. And this is why CMOs have to fight so hard to prove attribution, to prove what kind of ROI is coming out of the marketing department. It's because, the CEO is not seeing that consistent high-level execution. What they're seeing is, well, we missed out on this deal because when you break it all down, marketing was reactive, or, we missed pipeline this quarter, but when you break it all down, it's not just sales fault, it's the fact that marketing wasn't getting out in front of things. Okay. And so putting yourself in the CEO's shoes, the opinion that you're going to form from there is that, well, do we really need, 10 people on the marketing team? Let's just strip it down and, have a basic functional marketing team. But then, when you make that decision, it only, it kind of burns you long term when things do start to click and you do start to operate at a high level. So I think there's a lot of nuance here, but I think the perception thing is in large part on the fault of the marketers and how marketers in general tend to kind of look at their role throughout the entire sales process.
Also, I once talked to a CMO who transitioned from being in a huge corporation, a very famous name. It was actually Philips. I can say it because I'm not saying his name. So this CMO was in Philips, right?
Yeah,
And was in Philips for the B2C part. And he used to, he used to, he was used to the rest of the company from sales to the technical people perceiving marketing as the cool guys, as the ones that drove the
yeah,
revenue, that brought the clients, because it was a B2C environment. Then he had to transition because of, somebody offered him an opportunity at this B2B software company. He had to
yeah,
transition into a B2B CMO, VP of marketing role. He was basically a
yeah,
CMO without the C-level benefit. Now, there he found this other environment where marketing was seen as a support function, not just due to how the tech industry operates, but also because historically in that company, marketing was doing slide decks, organizing events, and printing merchandising.
yeah.
That was for 3 years of tenure was his biggest pain point and one of the things I think he regrets the most about taking that job. And my point with this is when I hear you talk, what I get as a message is that CMOs, even in B2B, they can have it all. You can, as a CMO, be the head of the coolest department that drives sales because you make the job of sales easier. That's what I get when I talk to you. That's what I get from your words. Am I wrong?
100%. 100%. I think that is, you know, we when I started this company and really where I came up with the strike framework was, I was at a company where, and I had come out of two companies where our marketing team operated at a really high level. These were very, A+ marketing teams with just some of the best marketing minds I've been around. But the one thing that we understood more than anything is we have to execute fast. And those were environments where we didn't sit on decisions. Those were environments where, if something needed to be pushed up to the CEO, we did that as a team. We didn't just say, all right, well, good luck. Let us know how it goes. Everything we did was a team-wide effort with team-wide precision. And it wasn't hard to get there at all. And that's the thing is, the roadblocks to getting there aren't very challenging. It's really getting we talk so much about alignment, right? Um, but the way that companies treat alignment is almost like, a one-off seminar or, kind of like a one-off project of, we're going to get everybody in a room for 2 or 3 hours and we're going to tell them everything that, we're going to do to make sure they're taken care of and make sure we're on the same page. Or, we think about alignment in the terms of like, here's the forecast for the year, here's the numbers we want to hit, this is what we want to do. But, the real alignment doesn't come out of the trips to Top Golf. It doesn't come out of the trips, the office pizza parties. Really what it comes down to is day-to-day execution and knowing what your role entails and what you're responsible for and what you're accountable to. I think that's a big piece too. And when everybody's aligned on what they're actually accountable for and where they need to leverage their, capabilities and their times the most, I think through that day-to-day execution, that's where alignment comes from. But the idea that, we're going to go do a workshop and the next Monday, everything's going to be kumbaya and we're going to be this high-performing marketing team, that just doesn't exist. It doesn't work like that. And in fact, before you get there, you're going to go through the peaks and valleys of trying to get there. You're going to go through a couple good weeks and then everything breaks down. It's when you start seeing those things break down is when we kind of got to get everybody back together real quick and say, hey, remember, this is the mission. This is what you're accountable to. And this is what you're responsible for. I find that a lot of marketing leaders, far more than sales leaders, struggle with the accountability piece and really pushing accountability on marketers. And I know as a junior marketer, when I was early in my career, I wanted that accountability and I wasn't getting it. I wanted somebody to hold my feet to the fire and say, this is what you're accountable for. But in so many organizations, that's not there. It's very much just check your support tickets for the week, update your monday.com board and, let's all have a good week. And so really, just talking about this and, you asking some great questions, this all comes down to how intentional you're being with your marketing team, with your sales team, with your customer success team, and ultimately how you integrate all three of those teams to work together. And if that level of intentionality is not there, if you're not going to hold their feet to the fire, it's never going to work. It's always continue to break back down. And you're just going to spin wheels, hiring consultants, and going to workshops and seminars that are high level, but doesn't really solve your problems. And so I think that's part of the issue as well.
Do you think that sales organizations are neglecting marketing and then they hire pre-sales and use pre-sales almost as if they were marketing people? Because I had that conversation. People tell me,
Yeah, I
yeah, well,
mean,
pre-sales, they go, they educate the customer, and then they
yeah,
bring it sales. It gives me the vibe that they are actually trying to supplement their marketing needs with pre-sales. Is that a thing from your
yeah,
perspective?
that's a good question. You know, I'd go back and forth on that because I think time has just taught me that everything makes sense given the right context. At the end of the day, marketing's job is to go out and create demand, create it and capture it. The problem is, most marketing teams are simply just capturing demand. Now, that's not a bad strategy if you're a startup in a, well carved out market. If you're a data, if you're a data, what are those called? If you're a data enrichment service, right? I can let Apollo and ZoomInfo create all the demand in the market, and I just go scoop up what's left just to get some traction. Um, I don't know, man. I think the big thing is you were kind of talking about pre-sales. I think the big thing there is when it comes to pre-sales, uh, understanding where, okay, based on the channel that we're executing on here, based on, the engagement layer that we're at, what do we need to meet this prospect with? What do we need to meet this lead with, right? If they go to your G2 page and then they come to your pricing page on your website, we need to have collateral that automatically gets pushed over to the sales team to reach out to this prospect that says, hey, here's some, here's some customer reviews on like pricing and impact, right? Like tactical in the weeds execution like that, where that collateral is super specific to what that person's searching for. Now, from like a cold outreach standpoint, um, I just don't see that working especially for most startups anymore. If you're a mid-market player, you've already created some demand. You already have a recognizable name. So that's a little bit different. I think you can create pre-sales up market when you have the credibility and you have the market awareness attached to your brand. I just think it gets a lot harder when nobody knows who you are. And so I do think on the front end, you need some sales guys out there validating the need and the positioning and the messaging in the market, but you also need marketing out there adapting that message in real time. You need people who are out there speaking to the market, creating content in the market. Really, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about creating demand is, again, kind of meeting your buyers where they are with, relevant content and relevant thought leadership on your product, your service, your industry, the things that are changing. It's really, when you boil it all down, it's actually really simple. It's just, yeah, kind of went off track there. But yeah, the pre-sales thing is a really interesting thing. I just think it depends on market maturity and, you know, how relevant you are in the market. And that kind of, comes back to knowing and understanding where you're at as a business.
Shifting gears here because something came to my mind right away at connecting the dots between the things we've been talking about. Something I've noticed too, especially in B2B, depending on the background of the CMO, but sometimes I think awareness is the Achilles heel of the marketing team. Awareness and all other so-called vanity metrics,
Yeah.
because they walk up to a CEO who wants to see revenue numbers, who sees marketing as a generator of
Yeah.
leads, and then they come like, okay, we had this many impressions, these many hits, but there's no other data to back it up. So, do you agree with that first of all? And if so, how do you remove that or change that for a CMO that is maybe still insisting that awareness is a relevant metric? And to some extent it is, but it depends. So how do
Yeah.
you see that?
Yeah. Well, this is a big conversation because I think something that never really gets talked about out loud is, when we start playing the saving our own ass game, right? And, a lot of times the CEO, he or she is so busy in their day to day, they don't see how these, dynamics are kind of playing out within the business. But I think a lot of time, like I would loop MQLs in there kind of with the awareness metric of like, okay, it's cool. Like we had this many people that basically showed they were interested in possibly doing business with us. But that doesn't really tell me anything. But if I'm a CMO and I've had 2 or 3 quarters in a row where I haven't hit pipeline, and, I'm going to shift that conversation to, well, we need more MQLs. We need to fill the top of the funnel again, et cetera. And so for another quarter or two, I can make that look like a successful run. But at the end of the day, really all I'm doing is saving my ass. Um, and so I think when it comes to some of these vanity metrics, again, it's where are you getting your information from? Kind of going back to these think tanks. And I think the think tanks have really convoluted on like what companies need to focus on. If you're a sales-led company, it's pretty straightforward. What's my customer acquisition cost? What's my CAC payback period? What is my customer lifetime value? And what are my retention and churn rates? Like that right there, those 4 metrics tell me everything I need to know about how pipeline's performing, how sales is performing, and how marketing's performing. Not everything, but that covers pretty much most of our bases. And so again, I think the awareness stuff, the top line metrics, those are just great to kind of see how a campaign or how, a new positioning might be affecting, um, you know, people being interested in doing business with you and your product or your service. But outside of that, I don't really see a ton of value in it, to be honest.
Agree. And you mentioned sales-led organizations. A mistake I see being made on that side is they tend to have great CAC. They tend to be
Yeah,
pros at getting out there, getting the lead, turning a deal into a prospect. I was talking the other day to somebody managing a sales organization, like in a managing role, and I just guessed. I told them if I were to guess without knowing anything in depth about your company, just from the things you told me, I think you guys struggle with customer retention. And
yeah,
I think I'm I'm convinced actually that the absence of an effective marketing team plays a big role in your customer lifetime value and retention being either long or short. If you don't have a proper marketing team, or if you do like that other
yeah.
company and you neglect the full thing, you will have a lower customer lifetime value because marketing is not just attracting them, it's also retaining them to some extent.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, you make really good points there. And I think a lot of the reason for that too is when companies cut the marketing headcount, they're asking customer success to pull in some of those functions. And yet, in a lot of companies that I've been in, even, customer success is treated like customer support number one, which, those are just 2 totally different functions. So they're being asked to do part marketing, part customer success, and part customer support. It's just impossible, especially in a SaaS company. And if it's a SaaS company that's growing fast, like, and you're asking a 2 or 3 person team to keep up with that, it's just impossible. Um, so yeah, again, marketing being the spearhead, saying, "Hey, we have going to customer success and say, hey, we have 200 accounts that are coming up for renewal next quarter. Here's that list of target accounts. Let's reach out to them, make sure they know, hey, you've got 60 days. Let's get a conversation going. Just make sure you're happy here. What can we be doing better? Are you happy with the contract? Do you want to extend it? Maybe we give you a discount." Like again, that tactical in the weeds execution, those little things is what kind of is really what makes the difference between, the companies that you see just crushing it right now and the companies that can't get out of their own way. Because it's no longer, especially in today's buying environment, it is no longer about who has the biggest budget, who has the best VC backing them, and who has the best tech stack. It is speed to execution. It's the ability to stay ahead of the curve. And for the sales team, it's, first to contact. Um, and I think a lot of marketing teams, kind of a lot of what we laid out during this call is these are the reasons why they struggle with that. It all starts with how they position what their role in the company is, which is, are we a proactive team? Are we a support function, et cetera? Like you had said, hey, they were just creating graphics, trade show banners and flyers. If I'm the CEO, yeah, I'm looking at that marketing team and I'm saying, okay, this is just a support function. They go out to the events, they set up the booth for the sales team, they collect the leads, and then they push them over. And yeah, that's part of the job role. That should be the 80% that, just keeps the lights on. But it's the 20%, it's that in the weeds day-to-day execution. That's where everything breaks down. Not knowing, and it's not like people can't figure these things out, but a lot of times it's if you haven't seen how it's supposed to be done and you're being asked to figure it out on your own, you're banging your head up against a wall over and over and over again until that light bulb goes off. Having the right person and having the right team that can come in and help you build out, hey, here's how I would execute on this in a day-to-day process or in a day-to-day way at the front line. Here's how I would integrate the teams around that. And here's how I would leverage the tech, whether it's automation, workflow automations, whether it's signals, whatever, to integrate that so everybody's on the same page. And that's what people aren't getting. They're getting these high level strategic frameworks, but they're not getting the in the weeds tactical execution on how to actually fully reap the benefits of those frameworks.
Fully agree. And something I will say that I've noticed, I've been on the marketing side. I now train salespeople, and I consistently advise people leading others and and management teams. What I
Yeah,
notice is that strategy comes first. You need to have a strategy, but it needs to be a strategy that has execution inside of it.
yeah,
Positioning is at the heart of the strategy, because otherwise you don't know who you're targeting, either in sales or in marketing. So you just
yeah,
with positioning you make your life easier. But what I'm noticing that CMOs will be very happy to hear this from somebody who's deep into sales is that the equation gets consistently called sales marketing. And you see there is the sales marketing team in many companies. That that's a wrong framing that we should change. The real sequence
yeah,
is not a hierarchy. And I want this to be very clear. It's not that one is on top of the other. It's a chain. And it goes marketing sales. It's not sales marketing. It is marketing sales, because that's how the system works. Otherwise, you put
exactly.
the cart before the horse. And I think you would fully agree with that.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% on the same page with you there. And that kind of comes back to looking at your go-to-market teams as a unified team with different organizations within that one team, right? Like think about a football team. You have offense, you have defense, and you have special teams, right? And it's everybody's on the same team, but everybody has their own role. But that doesn't mean, offense is just as important as defense. And, people might not think it, but special teams is just as important as all of those as well. And when you hear NFL teams talk about the team, they don't just say it was the offense's fault, it was the defense's fault. It was the team's fault. Everybody played a role in why we're winning or why we're losing. There's never this departmental level. Now, behind closed doors, maybe that's the conversation. But one of the things I think we could pull out of the way that sports teams manage their teams is kind of that unified, we're all in this together window, or that unified, we're all in this together point of view. And I think that drives everything. And that has to be a point of view that lives at the top. It gets pushed down through the organization, and it can't just be theory that's getting pushed out in a all hands meeting. It has to be in the way that the CEO shows up. It has to be in the way that the CMO shows up. It has to be in the way that the CRO shows up. It's about how intentional you're being with holding those teams to a higher standard. How intentional you're being with making sure that, hey, we've designed this execution model within the business. This is how we execute on go to market. And being intentional about enforcing that. And if you notice, hey, we're getting busy, and that happens, and things are kind of slipping right now, or that dynamic or that relationship between marketing and sales is breaking down a little bit. Let's just hop on a 10-minute meeting, get everybody back on the same track, make sure everybody's focused on the right things, and hit the ground running. Because the idea that, hey, we've missed pipeline 2 quarters in a row, something must be off in the data. It's probably not the data. It's just probably not. I'm sure it plays that role to some degree, but when you look at it, most companies, most sales-led companies, large orgs, they're losing 20 to 30% of their pipeline just on like latent execution, essentially, just marketing not being there when the moment counts.
So we have been circling around this topic without ever defining it explicitly, but something I really want to ask you in this show, so we have it on record, is how does alignment look like between sales and marketing team? Because if there is one outcome that companies get out of working with you is alignment. So what does that look like? If you're talking, if a CEO, a CRO, and even a CMO or a head of sales, they are watching this and they are passing this podcast to each other to see if we make sense or we are crazy, they will want to know, how does alignment look like? What does that word look like where my sales and marketing teams are actually aligned the proper way?
Yeah. You know, I'll say this. It's more of a feeling than it is something that you can observe, especially in a world where, half the team works remote. You're on site one day, you're off site four. So from a physical world standpoint, it's sometimes hard to observe that, right? But, if we're looking at data, for instance, and we're looking at the pipeline, when you know your marketing and sales team are in lockstep with each other, they're fully integrated and they're executing as one, you're going to see that your sales velocity is going up. You're going to see that your customer acquisition costs are going down. You're going to see that your customer lifetime value is going up. And those aren't going up because in most cases, it's not that you just have such an amazing product or such an amazing service. It's because people are staying on the ball. It's because marketing is there not to support sales, but to be out in front of sales and have them prepared for when those signals come in, when those buyers and prospects come in, they're meeting them in the moment that matters. And, that's going to look different for every buyer and prospect. But I think, the general feeling, and I look back on a couple of the teams that I was on, right? It was just like, I had a question sometimes if I was even working. I'm like, we just run so smoothly as a team. I'm able to come into work every day. I do my part. I deliver my part. I hand it off. It's this feeling that like everything is seamless. Everything is being executed at a high level. And I think another layer to the alignment piece is enabling your frontline employees and enabling your middle managers to have some say so in how things happen at the front line and how things happen on a day-to-day level. If we're looking for the marketing director and the CMO and the CRO to push everything down, if we have to wait for that decision gap, well, we can't expect our teams to be operating at a high level in the first place. If they have to go through 2 or 3 layers of bureaucracy to get those answers, well, then they're just kind of back to sitting on their hands. And that takes me back to, this idea that sales has of where marketing tends to be perceived as sitting on their hands, being a support function and waiting around. And I think some of it comes from that top-down dynamic of people don't have a clear understanding of where they have accountability, where their responsibility lies, and how their day-to-day impacts the overall performance of the business. So I think alignment starts there, getting clear on where people actually impact the business, having clear processes in place, and then being able to tie back, how do we execute on this go-to-market model? And how do we get in the weeds with that? Not just these theoretical ideas of like, well, we're going to build a sales model around SQLs being converted into meetings booked now or demos booked. A lot of companies are making those shifts without really thinking through, okay, why does it make sense for us to adopt this? How can we execute that based on the people that we have, based on the technology that we have, and based on the data and the resources that we have? So I think alignment is ultimately something that plays out over time, not something that happens inside of a workshop and not something that happens at, a Friday night Top Golf event. It's a process that lives within the business and plays out over time. And it's about making these constant pivots and these constant adjustments based on the feedback, based on the results that we're driving.
I think what we're getting at here is that the the things both you and I implement inside companies start out exclusively focused around execution. They are very heavy on real processes, real methodologies that you can apply the very next day
Yeah.
after you hear them. And we do that, but the outcome of this on the long term is not just tangible in terms of pipeline metrics, KPIs, CAC,
Yeah.
LTV, close rates. the outcome ends up becoming cultural, meaning what you define
Yeah.
as alignment is a cultural dynamic that just becomes the state of being of this company,
Yeah.
of this marketing and sales team. And I think that's the biggest value because it comes down to culture, and this proves that you can measure culture. This is us taking the execution and turning it into something abstract that is perfectly working and it's easy to understand. We got people to execute so well on these things that the culture improved. And since the culture improves, they keep executing well because that's just how they do things now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think, I think what you and I are doing is we're shifting that conversation away from it's the strategy to it's the way that we work, we interact, and we integrate with each other inside of the business. Um, yeah, and that's why I'm really excited about this. I think that, with what you're doing on the sales side and really helping companies build out, some of those strategic talk tracks around like how do we handle an objection without just totally disregarding, a lot of what I see out there from a sales training perspective. It's like, yeah, we're just going to totally disregard what they just said and we're going to shift the conversation to something they haven't even mentioned or shown any kind of interest in. And so I love what you bring to the table. And I think together, it's like kind of like we talked last week, getting these teams performing at a high level and seeing what that looks like before we ever make these big, broad changes to the overall strategy. Because now we're not going out, we're not paying some consultant $100,000 and waiting 6 months to see if this was the problem. It's, hey, a ten or $20,000 2-day event or 2-day seminar or workshop where we come in, we evaluate exactly how you're executing on your go-to-market, and then we give you the tips, or we give you the feedback, the resources, and the tactical playbooks that you can walk away and go start executing on, within the next day. And I think there's a lot of value to that right now in a market where people really don't have time to see how things are playing out. They need real solutions right now. And I think that's something that we bring to the table that I just don't see a lot of out there.
Yes. And something I'll say, I have two things in my head. Something I'll say to this extent is
Yeah.
that strategy, let's talk about it this way. I do criticize, and you do too, workshops a lot. And I understand that to the people watching and looking at our content, there might be a discrepancy there the moment we offer a workshop because that's what it is. Now, what is the difference? The difference is that if you treat corporate trainings and workshops like a motivational session, when all of us come together and
Yeah.
kumbaya and it's wonderful, and we walk out of it feeling like how we feel after a team event or a big corporate happening, then the workshop was a pointless investment. The difference here is
Yeah.
that what we provide are frameworks to follow up with that daily. It's not just the
Yeah.
knowledge you get. The knowledge, if there wasn't a framework of execution to be applied after the workshop, the knowledge you get will be retained only at 30%. And we do not want that. And that was one point. The other point is you mentioned how what drives customer retention it ends up being not the product, but this alignment. And I have talked to very product centric founders who would immediately object, saying, no, it is the product that makes people stay because
Yeah.
ChatGPT, because our metrics, because that. Yes, to some extent. And I would like to, as I'm the guy, all about either preventing or handling objections. The argument against that is that, first of all, you cannot take unicorns as an example. Cool.
Yeah.
Nowadays, everybody uses ChatGPT as the example of why you can neglect having a marketing and sales team. And I heard that at an entrepreneurship school from a professor.
Yeah.
And that's wild because we are talking about once in a, not in a lifetime, once in an age type of product, something that
Yeah.
changes how the world operates. Cool. We cannot compare anything to that. That is not a standard. That is the definition of a statistical outlier. The second thing is,
Yeah.
as good as your product is, somebody else built the same thing that gives the same results, and that's probably either better, more authoritative, or cheaper. How do you compete with that? You compete with that on great relationships, great customer experience, and consistent execution. And that's
Yep.
exactly the point that Gareth was making there. So, to all the product first people out there, yes, you got a point, but at the same time, do not neglect your sales and marketing because
Yeah.
that's what will truly drive customer retention that goes way beyond your industry standards. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah, beautifully said though. And that's the whole point. And I think we both see it through that lens of, with ChatGPT, there's been a little bit of a proliferation of, operational, more tactical level tech roles. I don't see those going away. I don't see the need for marketing teams and sales teams going away. And I think you made a great point. Relationships, people aren't going to mind, the AI outreach and stuff, but it's going to be the effort that you put into showing that you give a fuck. It's going to be the effort that you put into showing that we care about doing business with you. We want to prioritize this relationship and do business with you. That right there is going to move the needle so much more. That right there is going to move the needle far more in most businesses than anything else you're going to do, whether it's adding in the AI tools, etc. And like you said, speed to execution. That's the name of the game. You can have the best budget in the world, but if you can't execute consistently with speed, it's going to be a tough market to play in for the next 18 or 24 months.
Yes, a lot of challenges coming. Listen,
Yeah, I'm
bro,
excited to face them.
same to be honest. That's what the whole that's where the whole point of the thing is basically handling the challenge. And that leads me to we've been almost here for an hour. Want to be mindful of your time. So I want to ask you before we wrap it up, what is one piece of advice you would give to a CEO, to a CMO, and to a CRO? Can be the same advice, can be one for each, you decide.
Trust your people, trust your people, give them the resources that they need, put the systems in place, invest in, the right frameworks, invest in the right methodologies. Don't get caught up in the strategic layer, but give your people what they need to execute at a high level. Give them some of that autonomy, and that autonomy is built through clearly articulating what they're accountable to and what they're responsible for, but give them some of that autonomy to go make some of those small adjustments, to go make some of those pivots. Because I think when you do that, we eliminate some of that, sitting on the hands perception. We erase some of that, latent execution perception that marketing is a support function. A lot of times this is coming down to people simply just don't have the right resources, they don't have the right frameworks to execute in. And so they're just trying to figure it out. But if that's the constant state of your job, where you're just constantly trying to figure it out, eventually you get tired of pounding your head up against the wall and you just do the bare minimum because that's all you know to fall back on. So I think the most important thing you can do is invest in and really drive home the resources that your people need to execute as a high level.
I love it. People, this was the Tech
Yeah.
of Tomorrow podcast with myself and my partner here, Gareth. I will thank you for watching the show and giving us your attention. Again, subscribe to the channel, follow the Spotify, support the show, share this with a leader of your choice that needs to perform the next quarter, but not just the next quarter, the next year, because this is about guaranteeing, implementing a system, a revenue engine in your business that aligns marketing and sales teams.
Yeah.
Good times are coming if you do that. So keep that in mind, and I will see you in the next episode. Gareth, thank you for coming on the show.
Talk soon, brother.